This is a true story told on a sea monsters discussion forum in 2010. I wasn't supposed to tell this story. For nearly 50 years, I kept my mouth shut, just like the rest of them. We signed papers. We were warned. Some of us were threatened. But now, at my age, I no longer care. People need to know what happened in the summer of 1976 at Loch Ness. I was part of a team of 5 researchers from London working on a privately funded deep water scanning project. The official story was that we were testing new sonar technology for marine research. In reality, our job was to prove or disprove the existence of something unnatural lurking in the depths of the loch. We had access to cutting-edge equipment far beyond anything available to the public at the time. The organization funding us, which I won't name, had specific coordinates they wanted us to scan, as if they already knew something was there. At first, it was just a normal research expedition. The first 3 days were uneventful. We set up base on the southern shore, calibrated the sonar, and began our sweeps. We detected a few large fish, some submerged logs, but nothing extraordinary. Then, on the 4th night, things started getting strange. One of our team members, Dr. Philip Henshaw, woke us all up in a panic. He had been outside our tents taking temperature readings when he heard something, a deep, low-frequency hum coming from the lake. He described it as a vibration that resonated in his chest, like standing too close to an industrial turbine. We thought he was just imagining things, maybe overtired from the long hours. But then we noticed something else. Our equipment had stopped recording. Every single one of our sonar readings from the past hour was gone, erased as if nothing had ever been there. We reset everything, made some adjustments, and started another scan. That's when we saw it. Something massive was moving beneath us. At first, we thought it was a false reading, maybe interference from underwater currents or a technical glitch. But as we watched the screen, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a log. It was something alive, and it was getting closer. We stared at the sonar screen in disbelief. The shape beneath us was enormous, much larger than any known freshwater creature. It moved slowly, deliberately, almost as if it was aware of us. "That has to be a false reading," Paul Carter, our sonar specialist, muttered, adjusting the dials. His hands were shaking. Dr. Henshaw shook his head. "False readings don't move like that." The shape hovered at a depth of around 200 feet. There's it. For a moment, it seemed to remain still. Then, without warning, it shifted. Not up, not down, but sideways, fast. I could hear the tension in Paul's voice as he whispered, "That's not normal." Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The sonar screen showed nothing but the usual noise of the water. Whatever it was had disappeared into the depths. A long silence followed. Nobody wanted to be the first to admit what we were all thinking. Philip exhaled sharply and rubbed his face. "Maybe it was a sturgeon?" he offered weakly. "A 30-foot sturgeon?" I shot back. The uncomfortable silence returned. "Look," Paul finally said, "let's be logical about this. We document everything, keep scanning and see if it comes back. It could have been an anomaly, some kind of geological feature we misinterpreted." We all nodded, relieved to cling to a rational explanation. But deep down, I think we all knew better. That night, none of us slept well. I lay awake in my tent, listening to the soft lapping of the water against the shore. Every now and then, I thought I could hear something else, a deep, distant vibration, like a low hum just beneath the range of human hearing. The next morning, we checked the recordings from the night before. Everything after the moment the sonar picked up the anomaly was gone, erased. Paul ran every diagnostic test he could think of, but the data was simply missing, as if our system had been turned off the moment the object appeared. I remember Philip looking out at the lake with an expression I'll never forget. "We need to be careful," he murmured. "I think something down there knows we're watching." Philip's words stuck with me. Something down there knows we're watching. I wanted to believe we were just overreacting, that there was a logical explanation. But after seeing our erased recordings, the unease in my gut only grew stronger. That morning, we decided to run another scan. Paul recalibrated the sonar, while the rest of us double-checked our equipment, making sure everything was working properly. No one spoke much. We all felt the weight of what had happened the night before. By noon, the system was fully operational again. We started another deep sweep of the area where we had seen the massive shape. For the first hour, nothing. The usual rocky lake bed, the occasional school of fish, but nothing unusual. Then, at exactly 13 p.m., we picked up another anomaly. A shape appeared on the screen, larger than before. This time, it was closer to the surface. Maybe 150 feet down. Paul's face went pale. It's back. Unlike the previous night, this time the object wasn't moving away. It was rising. Jesus, Philip muttered. We watched in stunned silence as the shape crept upward, slowly but steadily. 140 feet, 130, 120. Then suddenly, the entire sonar screen went black. Not just a lost signal, completely black. No readings, no interference, just nothing. Paul frantically adjusted the dials, shaking the machine. This isn't possible. It just... Before he could finish, a sound reached us from the lake. A deep, resonant, humming noise. I can barely describe it. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't natural. It was a low-frequency vibration that seemed to pulse, almost like a heartbeat. We could feel it in our chests, in the ground beneath our feet. Philip looked at me, his face pale. That's what I heard last night. The sound lasted for about 10 seconds, then stopped, and just as suddenly as it had disappeared, our sonar screen flickered back to life. The shape was gone. Paul exhaled shakily and turned to the rest of us. I don't think we should be here. None of us argued, but we had no idea how much worse things were about to get. None of us spoke for a long time. We just stood there, staring at the sonar screen, watching the empty readings as if expecting the shape to reappear. But it didn't. Paul finally broke the silence. That wasn't an equipment failure. Something shut us out. Nobody argued. We were all thinking the same thing, though none of us wanted to say it aloud. Was it possible that whatever was down there could somehow interfere with our equipment? I glanced at Philip, who was still staring out at the lake, his jaw clenched. What are you thinking? I asked. He hesitated. I think we need to go out on the boat. I thought he was joking. You can't be serious. But he was. We have to get closer, he insisted. The sonar isn't enough. If something's down there, we need visual confirmation. Are you insane? Paul snapped. Something erased our data. Something made that sound. You really want to be sitting right over it in a boat? Philip didn't back down. I didn't come all this way to get scared off by a technical glitch and some weird noises. He looked at me. You're with me, right? I wanted to say no. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that if we left now, we'd regret it forever. Reluctantly, I nodded. Fine, Paul said bitterly. But if we don't come back in an hour, at least have the decency to report us missing. Philip and I loaded up one of the inflatable boats, bringing a portable sonar unit, a high-powered flashlight, and a camera. Paul and the others stayed behind at the shore, watching uneasily as we paddled out into the open water. The lake was eerily calm, the surface smooth as glass. The further we got from shore, the quieter everything became. No birds, no wind, just the soft rippling of the water against the boat. Philip powered up the portable sonar and lowered the transducer into the water. At first, there was nothing, just static. But then, about 100 feet beneath us, the familiar shape appeared. Only this time, it wasn't moving away. It was directly below us. A cold sweat broke out on my back. Philip, I whispered, we need to go. Before he could respond, the boat lurched. Something had moved beneath us. Something big. I barely had time to react before the deep, resonant returned, louder than before, vibrating through my skull like a tuning fork. Then, for the first time, we saw movement in the water. Something was rising toward us, and it was coming fast. The water beneath us shifted, sending ripples outward as something massive surged upward. Row! I shouted, grabbing at the paddles. Philip was frozen, his eyes locked on the dark shape beneath the surface. Then, for a brief moment, I saw it. A shadow, impossibly large, just beneath the boat. It wasn't just a trick of the sonar. This thing was real. And it was close. Philip snapped out of his trance and grabbed the other paddle. We rowed like our lives depended on it. The hum returned, a deep, unnatural vibration that made my skull feel like it was going to crack open. It wasn't just a noise. It was inside of me, rattling my bones. Then, the boat lurched again. Harder this time. Philip nearly fell overboard, catching himself at the last second. What the hell is it doing? He yelled. I didn't have an answer. I just kept paddling. The dark shape moved beneath us, but it wasn't attacking. It was almost as if it was testing us, seeing how we'd react. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it began to descend. The sonar beeped frantically as the shape slipped deeper and deeper into the abyss. 130 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet. And then, nothing. Gone. The hum stopped. The water was still again. We didn't stop rowing until we reached the shore. Paul and the others ran toward us. "What happened?" Paul demanded. We could barely breathe, but I forced out the words. "It was beneath us." Philip nodded, his face pale. "And it knows we're here." Paul stared at us for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "We need to leave, now." I wanted to agree. Every rational part of me screamed to get out of here. But another part of me, the part that had come all this way, the part that had seen something that defied all logic, needed to know more. And that's when I made the worst decision of my life. I said, "No, we have to go back out there." Paul looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to go back?" Even Philip hesitated. "Man, that thing could have capsized us. We barely made it back." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. We came here for answers, and now we know it's real. We can't just walk away. Paul shook his head. "Are you even listening to yourself? We don't know what we're dealing with. That thing, it wasn't acting like a normal animal." "That's exactly why we have to keep going," I said. "This could be the biggest discovery of our lives." Philip still looked rattled, but I could tell he wasn't ready to quit either. "One more attempt," I said. "But we do it right. We use the underwater drone." Paul exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "You're insane." But he didn't say no. An hour later, we had the drone ready to go. It was a small, submersible ROV equipped with a high-definition camera, sonar, and lights. If anything was down there, it would see it before we did. We launched it from the dock, watching the live feed on the monitor. The water was dark, murky, but the powerful floodlights cut through the gloom. At first, we saw nothing but fish and scattered debris on the lake bed. The sonar was clear, no large anomalies. "Go deeper," I told Paul, who was controlling the drone. 100 feet, 130 feet, 150 feet. I held my breath as the ROV descended into the trench, a deep crevice in the lake bed that sonar scans had marked as unusually large. It was the only place deep enough to hide something truly massive. 200 feet. The water grew darker, the visibility shrinking. The sonar beeped steadily, reading only the trench walls. No movement. Paul frowned. "I don't see anything." "Keep going," Philip said, his voice tense. 250 feet. The drone lights flickered. Then, the sonar beeped. A blip. Paul adjusted the camera. "Wait, there's something down there." The monitor showed a shadow, barely visible against the darkness. At first, I thought it was just a rock formation. Then it moved. Philip's breath hitched. Holy! The shadow unfurled, stretching across the screen. A massive form, larger than our boat, rising from the depths. Paul cursed, trying to stabilize the drone's camera. The image was blurry, distorted by the water, but there was no doubt. Something was alive down there. And then the screen glitched. Static. The drone's feed cut out completely. "Paul, what happened?" I yelled. He frantically adjusted the controls. "It's not responding. Something." The sonar let out a shrill warning beep. Something was coming up, straight toward us. The sonar screamed with warning beeps. Something was rising fast from the trench. Paul cursed, hammering at the drone controls. "I lost the feed. It's not responding." Philip grabbed the monitor, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's coming straight at us." I felt the air tighten in my chest. We weren't even on the boat this time. We were on solid ground, standing on the dock. And yet, a deep, primal fear settled over me. The kind that told me we weren't safe anywhere near this water. The lake's surface remained eerily calm, but the sonar told another story. 150 feet, 120 feet, 80 feet. "Shut it off," I snapped. Paul didn't argue. He killed the sonar, the monitor going dark. The beeping stopped, leaving us in unsettling silence. The three of us stood there, frozen, staring at the lake. Philip whispered, "Do you think it knows we're here?" I didn't answer. The water lapped gently at the dock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low vibration filled the air. It wasn't the sonar this time. It was the hum, that same deep, resonant sound we'd heard before, but louder, stronger, as if something was calling out, no, warning us. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The lake went silent. The air felt wrong, heavy with something I couldn't explain. My skin tingled like static electricity was building around us. Paul exhaled sharply. That's it. We're done. For once, I didn't argue. We grabbed our gear and backed away from the dock, never taking our eyes off the water. I half expected something to rise from the depths, to breach the surface in some monstrous display. But nothing did. The lake just watched us. At least, that's what it felt like. We returned to the cabin in silence, locking the doors behind us. None of us spoke about going back out there. Not tonight. None of us slept that night. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the sonar screen, the massive blip moving toward us. I heard the hum vibrating in my skull. I felt the weight of something watching us from the lake. Paul sat at the cabin's small table, drinking his third cup of coffee. Philip paced near the window, peeking out through the blinds every few minutes. This isn't normal, Philip muttered, running a hand through his hair. This isn't just some big fish or an undiscovered species. That thing knew we were there. Paul scoffed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah? What are you saying, that it's intelligent? Philip hesitated. I don't know, but I do know that the moment we sent the drone down, it reacted. It didn't act like an animal. It acted like it was aware of us. I swallowed hard. That was the part I hadn't said out loud yet. The same thought that had been gnawing at me since we got back. It wasn't just a creature. It was something else. Paul leaned forward, rubbing his temples. So what now? We pack up and leave? Just pretend this never happened? Silence filled the room. I should have said yes. I should have listened to the warning signs. Instead, I heard myself say, "We go out one more time." Philip turned, staring at me. Are you serious? I nodded. We need to get the drone back. It has data, video, sonar recordings. If we leave it down there, we lose everything. Paul let out a sharp breath. You're insane. I couldn't argue with that, but I wasn't going to leave without answers. We go at dawn, I said. One last time. Philip didn't respond right away, but I saw the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Paul shook his head in frustration. If we die, I'm haunting your ass. I forced a grin, but deep down, I wasn't sure if this was the dumbest or bravest decision I'd ever made. Either way, we were going back. The sun barely touched the horizon when we set out onto the lake again. The air was cold, still, and eerily quiet. No birds, no wind, just the soft hum of our boat's motor cutting across the dark water. Paul sat at the controls, his jaw tight. Philip was next to him, eyes locked on the lake's surface. I sat at the bow, gripping the rope attached to our retrieval hook. We were after one thing, the drone. It had sunk somewhere near the trench. If it was still intact, it could hold proof of what we'd seen. The thought both excited and terrified me. As we neared the coordinates, Paul slowed the motor. This is it, he muttered. Philip checked the sonar. Nothing on the screen yet. I took a deep breath and tossed the retrieval hook overboard. The weighted end sank fast, disappearing into the black water. I started pulling, feeling for resistance. Nothing. Deeper. Still nothing. I adjusted the angle and tried again. This time, I felt a tug. My stomach clenched. I think I've got something. I pulled harder. The rope strained, but it was coming up, slowly. Then a ripple broke the surface. Philip sucked in a breath. Did you see that? Paul shut off the motor, and suddenly the world felt too quiet again. I kept pulling. The rope was heavy. Too heavy. I gritted my teeth and gave it one last yank. Something breached the waterline. For a second, I thought I had the drone, until I saw the thick, dark mass tangled in the rope. It wasn't metal. It was flesh. And it was moving. I dropped the rope like it burned me. The thing slipped back into the depths, vanishing in an instant. But the moment it disappeared, the boat lurched violently to the side. Water splashed over the edge as Paul yelled, "What the hell was that?" Philip scrambled for the sonar. Oh my God, something's down there. Something big. The sonar screen was lit up, a massive shape circling just below us. Then, a deep hum rose from beneath the boat, louder than before. It vibrated in my chest and my skull, inside me. Paul grabbed the controls. We're getting the hell out of here. The engine roared to life, but before we could move, the boat shifted again. This time, it wasn't just a lurch. It was a pull. Like something was trying to drag us down. Panic shot through me. We were in serious trouble, and whatever was in the water, it wasn't letting us go. The boat lurched again, harder this time. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. Whatever had grabbed the boat was pulling it, dragging it slowly toward the depths. "Full speed, Paul," I shouted, my voice cracking. Paul slammed the throttle forward. The motor roared, the boat shot forward, and for a moment I thought we were going to break free. But the pull was relentless. The boat skidded sideways, threatening to tip. We had no choice but to fight against the pull, the thrumming hum that vibrated through the hull of the boat. The sonar screen showed the shape was growing closer. "What the hell is it?" Philip shouted, his voice strained with fear. I didn't have an answer. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. All I knew was that something massive was down there, something alive, something that didn't want us to leave. Paul's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls. The boat rocked violently, but he held steady. "We need to get out of here now," he gritted. "Whatever that is, it's too strong." But the pull only intensified. The boat tilted at a dangerous angle. I grabbed onto anything I could to keep my balance. Then, the hum grew louder, a low, deep rumble, as if something huge was rising from the depths beneath us. The water churned, bubbles surfacing, and I felt a sickening pressure building in the air. Boom! The water exploded beneath us in a massive burst, spraying over the sides of the boat. My heart skipped a beat. A massive shape shot out of the water, towering above us for just a second before slamming back into the depths with a crash. Everything went silent. The boat was still rocking, but the pull had stopped. The water was calm again, eerily calm. The hum was gone. The three of us were silent, staring at the water, still trying to process what had just happened. What was that? Philip finally whispered. "I don't know," I breathed, my voice shaking. "But we need to leave. Now." We didn't argue. Paul gunned the engine and sped away from the spot, heading back toward the shore as fast as we could. The boat bounced over the waves, the water smooth and uneventful once again. But none of us spoke. We didn't look back. The only sound was the engine. The only feeling was the fear lingering in the pit of our stomachs. We had seen something tonight, something we couldn't explain, something far bigger and more terrifying than we had ever imagined. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. We might have escaped for now, but whatever that thing was, it was still down there, and it knew we were coming. We didn't speak much on the way back to the cabin. We were all too shaken to say anything meaningful, too lost in our thoughts to make sense of what had just happened. Paul's hands gripped the wheel like a lifeline, his knuckles pale. He didn't look at us, didn't look anywhere but ahead, as if trying to convince himself that he was still in control. Philip sat in the passenger seat, eyes wide, darting nervously between the road and the rearview mirror, as if expecting something to follow us. As for me, my thoughts kept drifting back to that massive shape in the water, the thing that had breached the surface with such incredible power. I had felt its presence, its strength, even from the boat. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. And the way it had just stopped, almost as if it had allowed us to escape. Was it trying to warn us? Or had we somehow stumbled too close to its territory? "Do you think it's dangerous?" Philip asked, his voice trembling. Paul sighed heavily, his eyes still focused on the road. "I don't know. I don't know what the hell we just saw, but we're not going back out there. Not tomorrow. Not ever." I didn't argue. I had seen enough. But even as I agreed with him, something inside me, a nagging doubt, lingered. The sonar feed, the hum, the massive shape beneath the water. It all felt like part of something bigger, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. When we finally reached the cabin, we didn't unpack, didn't talk about plans. We just locked everything down, cameras, equipment, files, anything that had to do with the lake. It felt like a ghost town. The entire atmosphere felt heavy, as though the weight of our encounter was pressing down on us. We ate in silence, too shaken to even make eye contact. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't just encountered a creature. We had encountered something much older, something that had been living in the lake long before we ever came. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the massive, dark shape rising from the water. I could hear the hum in the back of my mind, a low vibration that would not leave me. At some point, I pulled out the sonar data. The readings were disturbing, more disturbing than I had expected. The shape had been immense, far bigger than any animal that should have been in that lake. It was unlike anything on the records. And then I found the most troubling detail: a deep trench, an ancient fault line that ran through the lake's basin. The sonar had picked up the shape rising from it, moving toward us in an almost deliberate fashion. It wasn't just an animal. It was something that had lived there for centuries, if not longer. And whatever it was, it had noticed us. I couldn't shake the feeling that our time on the lake had been nothing more than a warning, a reminder that some places are meant to stay hidden. But now that we had disturbed it, we were on its radar, and we might not be so lucky the next time. The next few days were a blur. We were in no mood to continue the research, and every time I looked at the lake from the cabin window, a knot tightened in my stomach. We had ventured too close to something we didn't understand, and now it felt like the whole lake was watching us. Paul avoided the topic entirely, keeping to his usual quiet routine. Philip seemed restless, pacing the cabin when he wasn't staring at the water. As for me, I kept reviewing the data, trying to make sense of everything. But it felt futile. The creature, whatever it was, had left us with more questions than answers. The strangest part? Every time we spoke about it, even casually, it was like we could feel the lake pushing back, as if it didn't want us to discuss it, like it had claimed some sort of territorial right over what we had witnessed. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was out there, waiting. 2 days later, we packed up the last of our gear. We were supposed to leave in the morning, but none of us had the heart to face the lake again. The boat was still tied up at the dock, the drone that had almost cost us our lives still on its failed mission. It seemed like a bad dream now. But there was one more thing to check, one more part of our research we hadn't yet examined: the files from the drone. Despite everything, I felt compelled to go through it one last time. I had to see what the drone had captured before we abandoned it. Sitting down at the table, I opened up the footage. The video feed was grainy, but there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when the water seemed to part, showing something large, something moving. But there was something else, something even more unsettling. Near the very end of the footage, just as the drone started its descent back toward the lake bed, I saw a flash, an image that had been recorded in the distance. It wasn't clear at first, but as I zoomed in, it became undeniable. A figure. A dark, massive figure, standing at the edge of the trench. The drone had captured the outline of what could only be described as a humanoid shape. Tall, wide-shouldered, and blending seamlessly into the darkness of the water. I froze, staring at the screen, my mind racing. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't even just a creature. It was something more, something intelligent. "We need to go," I whispered. My throat was dry. "We need to leave now." Paul and Philip didn't argue. They saw it too. The shape, the impossible figure just waiting for us. By the time we had packed up and started heading to the dock, the storm clouds rolled in. A storm, I was sure, meant to keep us there longer. But there was no way I was going to wait for it to trap us. As we pushed the boat out into the lake, I looked over my shoulder at the dark expanse of water. Something was down there, still watching us. And I couldn't help but think that we hadn't just discovered something hidden in the depths of the lake. We had awakened it. The question wasn't whether we'd be back. It was whether we'd ever be allowed to leave again. As we made our way out of the lake, the boat cutting through the water at a much faster pace than before, the atmosphere felt off. The wind had picked up, sending a chill through the air, and the storm clouds gathered more quickly than seemed possible. Paul, ever the skeptic, tried to remain calm. "It's just weather. You're overthinking it." But I could tell even he was unsettled. Philip was silent. His eyes never left the dark waters behind us. Every now and then, I'd catch him glancing over his shoulder, almost expecting to see something. Someone lurking just beneath the surface. I tried to shake the feeling, but it gnawed at me. That figure, caught on the drone footage, had been too clear to ignore. What kind of creature had we uncovered? It wasn't just a monster of folklore. It was something much more. It had seen us, and it had known we were there. The storm hit as we reached the shore. The wind howled, the trees swayed violently, and the rain poured down in sheets. It was the kind of storm that made you feel like nature itself was pushing against you, urging you to leave. When we docked the boat, the air felt charged, the kind of charged atmosphere you'd expect before something big happens. We hurried to unload the gear, our hands shaking not from the cold, but from a creeping fear that none of us could fully put into words. Inside the cabin, the power flickered as the storm surged outside. We set the gear down on the table in silence, all of us still processing everything that had happened. The footage, the shape, the drone's final moments, all of it was too much. Then, just as I thought I might be able to breathe again, the lights went out. The house plunged into darkness. For a split second, I thought I might pass out from the sheer weight of everything I had seen. "What the hell?" Philip muttered, fumbling for a flashlight. "We need to get the generator going," Paul said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. It was then that I heard it, a soft, distant hum. At first, I thought it was the storm, thunder, or the wind playing tricks. But it wasn't. It was that same deep vibration we had felt on the boat, the hum that seemed to echo from the very depths of the lake. I froze. Paul, Philip, and I all exchanged uneasy glances. The hum was getting louder. And then came the unmistakable sound of thumping, like something large, something heavy, was moving. The ground, the cabin. It was as if the entire world had started to vibrate. And then from outside, a shadow, a huge dark figure, moved past the window, blotting out the rain for just a moment. We all stood still, breath held. There was no sound now, just the loud pounding in my ears. Was it a trick of the light? The storm playing with our minds? No, it couldn't be. We had seen the figure in the water, but this was something different. The shadow moved again, this time more deliberately, as if pacing in front of the cabin. I could feel it, could sense it. Whatever it wasn't going to let us leave easily. "We need to go," I whispered. "We can't stay here. Whatever that thing is, it's not just in the lake, it's on land." Paul nodded, his face ashen. "I know, it's time to leave." But just as we gathered our things, another thump came from outside, followed by a loud scraping noise, as if something was moving across the ground toward the cabin. The door rattled violently. The windows shook. There was no denying it now. We were being watched. And whatever was out there, it was closing in. The air felt thick, like something pressing down on us from all sides. The wind outside had stopped, but the storm raged on, pushing the rain against the cabin's walls with unrelenting force. The hum was still there, deeper now, vibrating through the floorboards like the echo of something ancient and primal. "We need to leave." "Now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul didn't hesitate. He grabbed his bag, tossing it over his shoulder. Philip, though, was still glued to the window, his eyes wide, staring out into the blackness. "Are you seeing this?" he asked in a hoarse whisper. I joined him at the window, my heart pounding. The shadow was still there. It wasn't moving anymore. It was simply standing in front of the cabin, its shape barely visible in the pouring rain, but the presence was unmistakable. I swallowed hard. "We're not waiting around to find out what that is," I said, my hand trembling as I pulled open the door. The cold hit me like a slap. We had no time to think, no time to second-guess ourselves. I shoved the door open wide, and together we rushed out into the night, the rain soaking us instantly. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, unnatural, followed us, echoing through the night. It was as if something was moving with us, just behind us, keeping pace. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but every step felt like an eternity. The forest was close, too close. The trees loomed over us like dark giants, and I could feel their branches brushing against me, as if reaching out to grab us. Paul pushed ahead, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," he warned. I heard it again, the scraping sound, louder this time, closer. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Whatever it wasn't far behind. Then came a crash, a loud, reverberating crash that shook the ground beneath our feet. I stumbled, my heart racing as I glanced over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. For just a split second, two eyes, glowing, cold, and unmistakable, appeared through the trees. They were too large to belong to any animal I knew. The creature was standing upright, silhouetted against the dark trees. It was massive, towering over the forest, its shape dark and unnatural. I felt my stomach drop. "We need to move," I shouted. Paul didn't need telling twice. We ran, pushing through the wet brush, desperate to get to the road, to safety. But the sound of footsteps, louder now, followed us, growing closer with every breath we took. I could feel the ground vibrating beneath me, a deep hum growing stronger as we neared the edge of the forest. The air felt electric, crackling with energy. Suddenly, there was a loud roar, a sound that echoed through the trees, making my bones rattle. The creature was right behind us. I couldn't stop myself from turning around. The giant form was there, towering in the darkness, only a few paces away. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and the force of its presence made my heart skip a beat. It was moving, quickly, with an agility that didn't belong to anything that large. "Run!" Paul yelled. We didn't stop until we reached the road, gasping for breath. The creature had stopped at the tree line, its figure looming in the distance. It wasn't chasing us anymore, but it was still there, watching, waiting. We didn't dare look back again. We climbed into the truck, doors slamming shut as we started the engine. For a few minutes, the only sound was the engine's hum and our frantic breathing. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Whatever that thing was, it was out there, in the woods, and it wasn't going to let us forget it. But as we drove away, my mind couldn't shake the nagging feeling. We weren't just dealing with an unknown creature. We were dealing with something older, something that had been in those woods long before we had arrived. And now that we had seen it, now that we had disturbed it, it wasn't going to let us leave without its mark. The drive back felt like a blur, my mind too full to focus on the road. The truck's engine hummed steadily beneath us, the only sound that filled the silence. We hadn't spoken much since leaving the cabin, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet night behind, but the weight of the events from the lake still hung heavy in the air. "I still can't believe it," Philip said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost as if he didn't want to admit what we'd witnessed. "Believe it or not, we saw something," Paul replied, his tone flat. "It was real." I glanced at Paul. "What do you think it was?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's still in that lake, and I don't think it's going anywhere." Paul's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. We hadn't dared look back, not once since leaving the cabin. The creature, whatever it was, had remained in the lake, its presence unmistakable. But we weren't going to hang around to find out what else might be lurking beneath those dark waters. Eventually, the town appeared in the distance, the lights on the horizon breaking up the endless night. "I think we need to go straight to the authorities," Philip said. "We'll tell them what we saw, and maybe, just maybe, they'll take us seriously," I added. Paul sighed. "I don't know if they'll listen, but we have to try. Maybe they'll send someone to investigate." We finally arrived at the town's police station, our hearts pounding in anticipation. We walked in, the door swinging open, and approached the front desk where a tired-looking officer sat. "We need to report something," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Something we saw near Loch Ness. Something unnatural." The officer looked up at us with an uninterested expression. "What's this about?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage we'd captured of the lake, of the large shadow moving beneath the surface, the flickering light from the camera barely able to capture the enormity of what we'd seen. The officer glanced at the screen for a moment before looking back at us. "Is this a joke?" "No," Paul said, his voice hard. "This is real." The officer leaned back in his chair, a dismissive look crossing his face. "It's just a trick of the light. People around here see things all the time, mirages, shadows, reflections in the water. You've probably just been in the woods too long, kids." "You don't understand," I pressed. "We're not joking. We saw something massive in the lake. It was no shadow. It wasn't anything we could explain." The officer didn't react. He simply shrugged. "If you're looking for a story, maybe you should talk to one of those cryptozoologists or whatever they're called. But around here, it's just the lake. It's been like that for ages. No one's seen anything that's worth chasing after." We left the station feeling defeated, our hands still holding the phone with the evidence we couldn't seem to get anyone to acknowledge. "See?" Paul muttered as we climbed back into the truck. "What did I tell you?" "I don't care what they say," I said. "We know what we saw." As we drove away, there was no feeling of triumph, no sense of validation. We hadn't gotten the response we'd hoped for, but we couldn't shake the reality of what we'd experienced. The lake had been a place of mystery and danger, and whatever had been lurking there, It wasn't just a tale told by locals. The creature in the water, whatever it was, wasn't going anywhere. But for now, at least it stayed where it belonged, in the depths of Loch Ness. The end of part 1.